Town Hall, Seattle. Please welcome Washington Attorney General Nick Brown, Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield, and California Attorney General Rob Bonta.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a seat, guys. Thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. When I saw that it was going to be in the 70s in Seattle on a Monday, I wasn't sure how many people would come and spend some time with us this evening, but thank you so much for coming. I want to thank our two guests today, my colleagues amongst the Democratic Attorney Generals, and I'm going to introduce them, make a few remarks, and then we'll open it up for questions for everyone. But I'm really pleased to have all three of the West Coast Attorney Generals here today up in Seattle. And first to my left, who joins me also as being one of the newly elected Attorney Generals in this country, is Oregon's Attorney General Dan Rayfield. Dan has been the Attorney General since January of this year, has spent much of his career working in the public sector on behalf of Oregonians? Yeah. Oregonians, excuse me. That didn't even sound right. Oregonians. I won't mess up California. He's been working to protect seniors, support working families, and uphold Oregon's values. He previously and most recently served as Speaker of the House of the Oregon Legislature and co-led the state's budget as co-chair of the Ways and Means Committee. Off the clock, Dan is a peanut butter sandwich enthusiast, a Cheez-It superfan, and a proud dad who loves traveling with his wife and son. He met his wife while performing in community theater years ago, when even at one point he starred as Gaston in a production of Beauty and the Beast. You don't have the same personal details here, AG Bonta, but joining me from the great state of California, AG Rob Bonta, on April 23rd, 2021, he was sworn in as the 34th Attorney General of the state of California, the first person of Filipino descent to occupy the position. AG Bonta's passion for justice and fairness was instilled in him by his parents, who served on the front line of some of America's most important social justice movements. It is why he decided to become a lawyer to help right the historic wrongs and fight for people who have been harmed. He worked his way through college and graduated with honors from Yale University and attended Yale Law School. He has led statewide fights for racial, economic, and environmental justice and worked to further the rights of immigrant families, renters, and everyone in California. He previously served as the Deputy City Attorney for the City and County of San Francisco, where I was born, and served as the Alameda Council member and represented the Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro as an Assembly member. Please join me in welcoming our guests. So I just want to say a few remarks before I turn it over to my colleagues. We are in a very unique moment in this country. And right now, it is more than important than ever to have people standing up to fight back, to lead, and to address some of the harms that we are seeing all across this country. And I personally cannot think of any other position that I would want to be in, because attorney generals across this country are standing up to fight back against the lawlessness of the Trump administration, to address the harms that we are seeing in our states, and to make sure that we reaffirm the principles of fairness, justice, democracy, and the rule of law. And I rely in my work so much on the collaboration and coordination with our fellow Democratic Attorney Generals and the collaboration in our staffs, who are working very, very hard on a daily basis to address the concerns and challenges that you all are facing. And as we've been doing this litigation work, we as a group of Democratic AGs decided that we should also be collaborating together to speak and hear from the public more often. And so the AGs have been having town halls and community forums. I think this marks maybe number 6 or so, where we are listening to the public, trying to answer some of your questions and make sure at the end of the day that we are best representing our respective states' interest. We were talking to some of our media friends earlier today, and there was a question about whether or not we are in a constitutional crisis or not. And in my mind, that is somewhat of an academic discussion, because we are very much in a crisis. We are in a crisis because we have a president who simply disregards the law, who disregards the separation of powers, who does not care about precedent or constitutional authority. He is doing what he wants. And he is doing it with such brazen disregard for the truth. And the lies that we see on a daily basis from him and his team from the White House is alarming to me. Thankfully, what we're seeing from Democratic Attorney Generals is that we continually reaffirm that some of our democratic principles can be protected. We challenge those actions, we go to court, and thus far, for the most part, we have been winning. We have really serious challenges ahead, but I am excited to be in this position and have this opportunity to have this dialogue with you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Well, thanks for having us here from the great state of Oregon. It's always fun to be up here in Washington. Normally, I'm up here watching a baseball game with my son. We always take the train up. But truly, it's an important conversation that we want to have tonight. But first, before I do that, I want to tell you all a story. I want to tell you about a conversation that I had with my governor about 4 or 5 months ago, and she doesn't know that I'm going to tell you all this private conversation that we had in the Oregon State Library, which is where the governor's office is located in Salem, Oregon. And so the governor and I have a long history. I served as her co-chair of the Budget Committee. I replaced her as speaker when she became governor, and now am serving together in our executive office working in this fashion. So we were meeting very early on in January, and she said, and this is important, she said, you know, when I was speaker during the first Trump presidency, I kept looking on the news all the time, and I kept seeing Bob Ferguson every single day. Bob, 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 Bob. And she was like, you're not going to do that to me, are you? And so I stand here today. We're about 5 months into this thing, okay? Oregon has 23 lawsuits filed, and I stand here in Washington to tell you I am the Oregon version of Bob Ferguson. But I still haven't admitted that to my governor in that space, although I think she's a little bit frustrated. I think all of us have been on TV, been in the news more than we ever hoped for. I didn't take on this role thinking that I wanted to be this anti-Trump individual, because that's not who I want to be in this world. There are other incredible important things that our offices do in our communities, whether it's protecting consumers, whether it's keeping our communities safe, but also, and most importantly right now in this moment in time, defending our democracy and protecting of the rule of law. Because right now you have back east, I think that's east because I think that's north, back east what you have is a Trump administration that is continually making decisions in the dark. They're doing it without public input. That is not how a democracy is supposed to work. And that is why you have Democratic attorneys general hosting these forums across this country to actually shed light on the things that they're doing, to hear from you about how these decisions are impacting you. Because what we have found is in these conversations with each and every one of you, this sometimes helps us better represent our communities. We learn things that we ordinarily wouldn't hear. These things have resulted in lawsuits. We do our jobs better because of conversations like these today. And I would continue to encourage people to continue to reach out to us. Today, some of us, like my family, we don't like speaking in front of people, even though I did community theater. I did not know that that was going to be included in the bio. Jenny Hansen, where are you? Jenny is my comms director. We're going to have a conversation after this. But that's why we're here today, is to hear from you. This is incredibly important because the decisions that are going on right now are impacting us all, whether it's education, public safety, healthcare, or sanctuary state laws. The fear in what's going on in this community is absolutely outrageous, and I'm proud to be a part of a team of Democratic attorneys general that are standing up to the Trump administration day in and day out. And so I will turn it over to the amazing Attorney General Rob Bonta.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Rob Bonta, California Attorney General. I just want to first say how grateful I am and how much I appreciate the opportunity to be here in Seattle with all of you, my colleagues, H.E. Brown and Rayfield. The West Coast is the best coast, and so we are here together, unified, teamed up, partnered, and looking forward to hearing from all of you. I've always believed that I, as a elected official, and my team are at our best when we're hearing from and listening to and co-creating solutions with the people that we represent, our bosses, the American people. And when you share with us your experiences, your thoughts, your input, we're better at what we do. So looking forward to tonight's conversation. One really important message that we want you to leave with is that we are a team. We are unified. We are working together. We think we're able to perform at our best when we share resources and expertise and strategy. And so we have a team of attorneys general, I'll be clear, Democratic attorneys general, who from the Canada border to the Mexico border, from the West Coast to the East Coast, have been working hand in hand since before the presidential election, preparing for the possibility of a Trump administration 2.0, listening to all of the comments about what a Trump administration would look like, reading what they wrote down and gave to us in Project 2025 to plan for this moment. So we are prepared, and we have a commitment to take the Trump administration to court each and every time they violate the law, violate the Constitution, and hurt our states. And so that has meant 23 lawsuits from the state of California up to now. We're in 19 weeks of the Trump administration. So it's more than one lawsuit per week. And it's not because we decided in a room that, hey, it would be a great idea to sue Trump once a week. It would, it would pop and the press would understand that. We want to sue the Trump administration never, because that would mean he's following the law and complying with the Constitution. But and every time we sue him is based on what he does, his decision to violate the law, and then the standing that we have as attorneys general. And it's looked like a lot of things, from defending core constitutional rights like birthright citizenship, the right to be an American citizen if you're born on American soil, or protecting our right to vote and making sure our votes are counted without any unneeded and unnecessary and unlawful obstacles, protecting critical funding to the tune of trillions of dollars for things like health care and housing and food and child care and college and public safety and disaster relief. The Trump administration wants to be Congress. They want the power of the purse so badly to appropriate and impound and stop funding that's already been appropriated from going out to our states. We've protected billions of dollars already to our states. We're standing up to unelected private citizen Elon Musk, who tried to access with his army, his Doge army, private sensitive information of Americans across the country. We're holding him accountable. We're also pushing back against the unlawful tariffs that have turned our economy into a tailspin, raised costs for everyday Americans after everyday Americans went to the polling booth and voted to lower our costs and make life more affordable. So we're covering a lot of ground with our lawsuits, and it's important that we uphold the rule of law, the Constitution, make sure that our democratic institutions are intact. We have a president who wants to violate the law brazenly, frequently, blatantly, consistently. And so we have to meet him in court each and every time. The courts are being stress tested, there's no doubt, but they are holding firm. We are getting court orders in nearly all of our cases where we've sought them, blocking the unlawful acts and stopping the harm from being visited on Americans, and it's our goal to continue to do that. I want to end with this before we answer questions and hear from all of you. We have a very important official role. We can confront the Trump administration in court and block him from doing unlawful things that hurt the American people and the people in our states. And we're not the only ones with a critical role right now. Everybody has a critical role to play. You have a critical role to play. I grew up as someone whose parents were involved in the United Farm Workers of America movement, a dad involved in the civil rights movement, a mom, thank you, a mom who's an immigrant from the Philippines who fought to restore democracy in her home country after it was taken away by a dictator. And I learned from an early age that people power is the most potent power that there is. And Trump's bosses are not his billionaire buddies or greedy corporations. His bosses are you and me and us, the American people. We have a government of, for, by the people. The people will always have the first and the last word. So I know it's a trying time, but it's a time where we need to recommit to our democracy. Democracy thrives on activism and participation and engagement. It dies with neglect, and it dies in the dark and with apathy. So we need people to continue to step up. You know that. I'm speaking to the choir here because you're here. You're committed. You're engaged. But I think each of us, including us up here, can dig a little deeper, do a little more, fight a little harder, recommit to put in even more effort. And I know that'll be important in the time ahead. Politics is very much not a spectator sport. It is a full contact sport at times. And so we need people who are going to have courage and people who are going to fight. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here, for engaging with us. I look forward to listening to you tonight and to our time together. Thank you.
So just a little bit about format. You know, as we talk, each of us tend to get very similar questions from our constituents in our states, concerns about what we're seeing, challenges they're facing. So I know we have a number of questions that we're anticipating because of some of the similarities. So we're going to address some of those questions first and then open it up for the general public. But hopefully that'll give us an opportunity to talk about all of the similar challenges and concerns that people are facing. So I'm going to start, I think, on this side.
Hi, my name is Paul Neum. I'm a physician and a cancer researcher in Seattle. I care for people with Merkel cell carcinoma, a rare but aggressive skin cancer that took the life of Jimmy Buffett. In the past decade, thanks to research funded by the NIH, we have seen a 10-fold increase in the chance our patients will survive by using new immune therapies. But for many, the cancer still comes back and we run out of treatment options. That's why our team developed new approaches, including a way to reprogram a patient's own immune cells to fight the cancer more effectively. After 2 years and a 700-page application, our grant proposal was named a top funding priority by the National Cancer Institute in December. The final decision meeting was scheduled for February to determine funding. It never happened. With no explanation, the entire process was frozen. A new meeting has been scheduled, but we've already lost critical momentum. We even received a $1.2 million grant from a Washington State foundation to help move this therapy into patients, but that money can't be used without the federal matching funds. As a result, 60 researchers across 4 major institutions, UW, Fred Hutch, Michigan, and Virginia, are stalled. Some are thinking of leaving research altogether. These aren't just numbers or line items. This is about patients who are waiting for treatments that could save their lives. We have the science, we have the plan, and we have a team ready to go. My question to you is, what can be done to make sure that funds that have already been set aside by Congress for life-saving research are not illegally withheld?
Well, I'll start, and not all 3 of us have to answer every question. But I think, you know, it is important for us to talk about not only the legal actions that we are bringing on behalf of our respective states, but the specific and direct harm that people are going to suffer because of some of these executive actions. And we're literally talking about life and death issues. We're not just talking about money or employment positions or, you know, the research that can be done. We're talking about whether people in this country are going to live or die based on the research and the work that you and your colleagues are doing. And that is part of the reason that one of the first actions that we brought collectively, and I think all of the Democratic Attorney Generals joined that case, was opposing the illegal and reckless cuts that were being done by the Trump administration to cut NIH funding. And at least thus far, we've, I think, seen some really positive results to stop some further cuts, to reverse some of those cuts, and to receive the funding that you and your colleagues should be entitled to. To the extent that you're not, let's talk. Because I want to make sure that we are tracking all of the funding that our respective institutions should be getting. And let me end with this, and then I'll pass it to anyone who wants to add more. You know, so often, and you guys probably experience the same thing, when we bring a lawsuit against the Trump administration, I get critiqued from the state Republican Party and members of the public about, well, you know, why don't you focus on issues in Washington? And I, you know, either they're not paying attention or they don't understand, but this is the perfect example of us suing the Trump administration because of the impact that it's having on Washington and Oregon and California and all across the country. And in the relief that we got in that case that we first brought, only the states that participated got relief, which means all the Republican states and their attorney generals that chose not to join our lawsuit because they are so fearful of a vengeful president, their states don't get the same benefit that our states do. And so that is part of the reason that we are in this fight, because of the national impact, but also the very specific harm in our respective states.
Yeah, I was just going to point out, you bring out a really interesting point, A.G. Brown, where in the Oregon legislature was about a month ago, we were testifying about our budget. You know, and when you testify in a legislative committee, if you have anybody's been there, sometimes the Republicans, they see the AG that's out there, you know, doing good in the world, and they want to attack you. And we knew that would happen. And so we tallied numbers in the state of Oregon back in May about the proactive work we've been doing. We were protecting about $1.6 billion of federal funding coming into our state, right? And this is money that otherwise wouldn't have come in, that would then have impacted, frankly, our entire budget in this same process. So it's incredibly impactful work, especially when you look in the aggregate with specifically to the health issues that are going on right now. I think we have to call it what it is. It is an attack on science guised as cost-saving measures. Right, and it is absolutely astounding. When we looked at the numbers at the Oregon Health Sciences University here down in Oregon, it was more than $175 million that were in jeopardy into the state of Oregon. Right, I mean, it's incredible the attacks that are, and there's a ton of them, right? We're seeing it in the education side. So it's incredibly impactful. The one thing that I really hate about this role is that everything we're doing right now is incredibly reactive. Right? Like, I would really like to be on the proactive front end where we don't have to come in, because if the three of us are getting together saying we need to file a lawsuit, something bad is already going on. And that's the one thing that's incredibly frustrating, especially when you hear, I mean, these stories are incredibly personal. So thank you for being here today.
I just want to add, thank you for the work that you do for your patients, to promote public health. Thank you for telling your story. Storytelling is so important from everyday people. Whoever you are, whatever you do, if you've been adversely impacted by an action from the Trump administration, tell your story. Make it human, make it personal, make it authentic, make it yours. Because the selling point at the federal level is they're cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. And life-saving treatments, and life-saving cures, and life-saving therapies, and health-improving breakthroughs are anything but waste, fraud, and abuse. They are critical. They are essential. So telling those stories is so impactful. We have 2 lawsuits we're a part of with respect to National Institutes of Health funding that the Trump administration has sought to withhold after Congress already appropriated it. It just has to do with 2 different types of funding, indirect costs and direct costs. But this is a common move that the Trump administration has used time and time again. They see congressionally appropriated funding and they want to block it. They want the power of the purse. They want the power to spend, to appropriate. They don't have it. So we've brought lawsuits arguing violation of the separation of powers, as well as another federal law called the Administrative Procedures Act. But as soon as the actions withholding this critical, essential funding became or something that we became aware of, we brought lawsuits. And we've been very successful in this argument that the power of the purse belongs to Congress, not to the Trump administration.
Thank you very much. Over here.
Yes. Hi, I'm Henry, downtown Seattle resident, a member of One America, which is an immigrant rights organization with chapters in King, Clark, and Yakima County. I'm also a Chinese American, and the actions of the Trump administration in attacking immigrants, including legal permanent residents, international students, and if I'm being honest, even US citizens who might look like immigrants, it really reminds me of the Chinese Communist Party's actions during the Cultural Revolution. It reminds me of the exclusionary hukou system, and it reminds me of the disappearing of Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities. So I have a two-part question. First, as a taxpayer, I don't want ICE to be misappropriating my state and local tax dollars by commandeering local police resources, because every hour that the police is spending on federal immigration enforcement is an hour that they're not addressing local crime and safety issues. So my first question is, how are the state attorneys general ensuring that the local police are doing the job that we, the taxpayers, are paying them to do? Second, when the local police moonlight for federal immigration enforcement, they make the entire community less safe because immigrants, which represent about 15% of the population, are less likely to approach the police to report crimes, to provide information that helps solve crimes, and to testify in court to put criminals away. So my second question is, what are the state attorneys general doing to protect states' rights on local policing against undue outside interference from the federal government? Thank you.
Great question, thank you. In California, we have a law that we passed back in 2017, which says exactly what you've stated, that we want our limited, scarce, and very critical and important local law enforcement resources to be used for criminal law enforcement, to focus on public safety, to focus on violent crime and other crimes, and to not be commandeered, conscripted, used for immigration enforcement. And that is the law of the state of California. It's a law that has been challenged in court by the Trump administration under Trump 1.0. We won in court. We argued that it was an unlawful violation of the 10th Amendment for the Trump administration to try to conscript or commandeer our resources for our local law enforcement to be used for immigration enforcement, and the Ninth Circuit upheld our right to do that under the 10th Amendment. So that continues to be the law in the state of California. When law enforcement is focusing on criminal law enforcement, keeping communities safe, when witnesses know they can come forward and victims know they can come forward to report a crime and work with local law enforcement without fear of retaliation based on immigration enforcement, communities are safer. And so for all the reasons that you've said, we have a law in the state of California that requires local law enforcement to focus on criminal law enforcement and not civil immigration enforcement. It is unlawful under many circumstances. There are some exceptions in the law for local law enforcement agencies to work with ICE to detain, to arrest for immigration enforcement. Some sheriffs and some local law enforcement have talked a little bit in criticism of the law, have suggested that they might in the future unlawfully cooperate with ICE, but that action hasn't taken yet. And we are very prepared to take action against local law enforcement agencies that violate the law of the state of California. We expect them to enforce the law. We expect them to follow the law, including our SB 54, which requires them in most circumstances not to cooperate with ICE. So we're watching closely, and we believe our communities are safer because of our law in California. And it is something, of course, that the Trump administration is waging the culture wars on. He has a list that he put out with all sorts of fanfare with misspellings and inaccuracies about who was a quote-unquote sanctuary jurisdiction. Very unremarkable. California has made it clear what our position is on this issue. But they are trying to condition certain funding, Homeland Security funding, Department of Transportation funding, on a commitment by states who received that funding to work and cooperate with ICE in violation of our 10th Amendment rights. So we brought a lawsuit based on that because that's an unlawful coercion of spending authority that we think that they're not allowed to take action on in that way, and we're trying to block it in court. So we continue to stand firm with our law in the state of California, and I really appreciate your question. Thank you.
And I was going to point out, and I want to pull rank on Attorney General Bonta here. You said 2017? Yeah, Oregon was 1987. Now, there's a reason, actually, a real reason why I wanted to point out the deficiencies of California. And the reason is that these laws, right, which have this foundation in public safety, right, allowing victims to come forward, allowing witnesses to come into the courtroom, feeling comfortable, again, using state resources for public safety in that same space. They've existed since 1987 in Oregon, peacefully coexisted with Democrat presidents, Republican presidents in this space. So I think the tenure and the policy behind these things is pretty well established. What's interesting right now and what you're beginning to see, and this is with this list, and this happened during the first Trump president administration, they tried to tie funding, right, and you all saw this during the first 4 years, they tried to tie the funding to these laws, the existence of these laws, to compel us to do things. And that's where you had the rulings in the first Trump administration say, no, you're wrong. You don't get to do that. And they're starting down that path again right now. And you can just start seeing this start to ripple up. And so we're watching that as Democratic attorneys general across this country, because when they do, and they try and take the funding away to compel action, we will stand in place to protect our sanctuary state laws that exist up and down the West Coast. And I feel very fortunate, again, to be on the West Coast. So I think that's kind of one of the things that I like to point out is just that long-standing history of these laws. Now, there's another thing that we tried to do in Oregon, and I think actually A.G. Brown and I think A.G. Bonta did some of the same thing, is get ahead of this. Right? So you've got these independent sheriffs, independent municipalities across the entire state, a lot of different political leanings in those areas, right? So what we tried to do is bring law enforcement together and say, this is what the status of the law is here in Oregon. We also have the same thing, all of our agencies, any state employee also has to follow this. So we have state guidance that we put out to all of the different agencies to make sure that there was a common understanding. We also have a hotline in Oregon that someone can call in if they believe that our laws have been violated, and then our Department of Justice actually investigates and looks to see if there's any there. Sometimes there is, most often not. Right? Most often someone thinks they may have seen something, but when we look in, there really isn't. In Oregon right now, we are finding that our state employees and our law enforcement are complying with our laws.
Well, Washington wasn't until 2019, so maybe we're a little behind. But it was really important for us to adopt such a law for the same reasons that you've said and that your question suggests. I will tell you that the most difficult case that I have had to bring thus far in my very long 5 months as Attorney General was my decision to sue one of our county sheriffs for failing to follow the Keep Washington Working Act. I didn't want to do that. Much like that I don't want to sue the Trump administration. It's not fun to sue another local official. But the disregard for Washington state law was so obvious, so plain. We have all the receipts. This is a sovereign right of our state to set these boundaries for reasons that my colleagues have suggested. We feel very confident that these will withstand the test of scrutiny from further actions by the federal administration or court orders. But we need to make sure that we're making this a safe environment. The other thing I will say is that, for the most part, from my perspective, law enforcement, local law enforcement, doesn't want to do that work either. They want to address crime in their communities. They want to deal with people that are violating the law. For the most part, they're not eager in being ICE officers. Now, there are some outliers. There are some that lean into that cooperation, to that work, but they just want to do their jobs in their local jurisdictions, and that is the reasons that each of us have some version of the Keep Washington Working Act to make sure that they can protect the limited resources that they have and keep their focus there. Next question.
Hello, my name is Christina Billingsley. I live here in Seattle, and I I'm the chair of the board for Washington Conservation Action. We are a statewide nonprofit that works on environmental advocacy. We elect champions for the environment. We mobilize the public to get involved in local environmental policies and also statewide work to make sure that our state laws are supporting overburdened communities particularly and focusing on environmental justice topics. As you've seen, as everybody has seen, the current administration is doing its best to start intervening and trying to undermine our environmental laws, ranging from the Endangered Species Act to the Clean Water Act to many more. And one thing that I would like to bring is in the environmental movement, we know about animals, water, air, clean air. These are all priorities that everybody has as people. One thing I would like to offer is when we have strong environmental laws, that creates economic opportunity across the country and our states. We've passed, in our 3 states here on the West Coast, we've passed some really amazing, pioneering, transformative work to give people good, sustainable jobs they can be proud of. I work as a mentor in many ways for young people of color across the state of Washington and specifically here in Seattle as well, for young people who need jobs, who need to know that there's a future for them and that green economy is for them. So what I would like to offer is the question, thinking through that perspective, building a green economy and what we're losing right now with such disinvestment and such cuts to our workforce, our federal workforce enforcing these laws. How can you in your offices, what is your plan to get ahead and to continue supporting your states in adopting strong climate and environmental policies and to help states adopt and implement them in the long term so we can really build a sustainable, healthy, just economy?
Thank you very much. I feel like the former Speaker of the Oregon House should start with this question as a former legislator.
I was kind of feeling like the middle child in this conversation. I was like, I don't know if I'm supposed to act out or what my role as the middle child here is.
We put you in the middle. I mean,
I've been in the middle my whole life living in Oregon. I think it's a really interesting conversation because we have these defined set of tools. So I came from the legislature. I know actually A.G. Bonta came from the legislature as well. And in this role, and you know this better than anyone else, right? You have these unique set of tools that you can pass and act on, in terms of laws, in terms of budget, to really implement your values, right? And then when you move into the Attorney General space, the one thing that I looked at in terms of environment is holding wrongdoers accountable. Right? It is right now in this moment in time, right? We are looking at federally, how do we make sure that some of those investments made under the Biden administration continue to happen now, right? So we have electrification, right, that's moving across, and I'll just speak only from Oregon, right? That's a big case that I think all 3 of us are involved in some of these spaces. Now, that's a different set of tools, right? We're trying to continue the work. And then when I looked at myself in this role, you've got this enforcement side, we're in this protection role, and then the one thing that all 3 of us have that I think is incredibly important is the soapbox that we have. Right, in advancing our values in this space and leading on issues as we see them and being a thought partner with our legislative partners in blue states like ours on the West Coast, where we can put our actions into value. But I think you bring up a really interesting point and I don't know if you knew you were bringing it up, about the moment in time that we're in right now, where a lot of the things that we're doing are because of executive orders. There are administrative things that are going on, and they're violating the Constitution, they're violating the law. A lot of what President Trump is doing, if Congress did it, they could probably get away with some of this stuff. And that's the thing that should have everybody in this room incredibly concerned, right? Where we are this first line of defense right now. Some of these battles are going to move to Congress, and they're going on right now. You think about the big, beautiful bill, whatever the hell he calls it, right? Like, it's crazy-ass shit. Like, this is... You want to provide health care to undocumented immigrants in our communities, well, you know what? We're going to cut your Medicaid funding, your expansion population, 10%. That's a $1.3 billion hit in Oregon. I have no idea what is in Washington and what is in California. This stuff is wild, right? But it just is a very different field. And so in 2 years, when we get into our congressional elections, that is such an incredible moment for our country's history. I'll shut up. I apologize.
My children are backstage. I was going to have them out here, but who knew that my middle child here would be so... no. On top of it, all the other things, I mean, the illegality that we're seeing from these orders, eliminating funding, we're all part of the electric grid electrification lawsuit. It's also just stupid. I mean, it really is. I'm not a legislator. I'm an executive branch, a lawyer and litigator first and foremost. But does anyone in this room think that we're not, and our children are not going to be driving electric cars in the future? That we're not going to be driven by alternative sources of energy? This is the future. It is coming. I mean, I would have hoped that Elon would have, spread the word a little bit. But this is coming. And yet we're seeing this push, this reversion to fossil fuels that are going to run out at some point, that are demonstratively harmful and deadly for our children. It's just bad policy. And so, Dan is right. We have our tools as litigators. We can move to stop executive orders. We can use our bully pulpits. But we need that collaboration with our legislative bodies to make sure that we work with them to support their efforts. And Washington and Oregon and California have been leading the charge nationally on some of these environmental policies to push back on stupid policy, illegal actions for the future of our children and our planet. I mean, it is real and it is inevitable, and we have to treat it with that urgency.
I'll just be quick on this. In California, we're very proud of the record of environmental stewardship that we've put together, our body of work over many years, greenhouse gas reductions and commitment to clean air and clean water, environmental justice, and we want to continue that path of progress and unhindered by and obstructed by the Trump administration. And so we're committed to that path of progress. When we go to other states in the nation, other countries in the world, we often get approached, people who saying they're inspired by what we've been able to accomplish in California and who look at some of the things we've done as a blueprint. And that's also true of Oregon and Washington, who have led in this space. I think together we have led in this nation. And so we want to defend and protect that, including jobs, clean jobs, green jobs, as mentioned. And our North Star is stopping and blocking the Trump administration from doing unlawful things. This attempt to withhold funding from electric vehicle infrastructure is completely unlawful. It's already been appropriated by Congress. He can't stop it. And so that's why we went to court to sue him. We've had clean car and clean truck waivers that we got, waivers from the Clean Air Act, that other states have adopted, that California has a unique ability to get a waiver on, and the Trump administration is in the process now of using an illegal tool to try to revoke those waivers that have already been granted. And we're prepared and have announced that we'll sue if and when that happens. And so we're going to defend our progress unapologetically. We're not movable on this, and prevent the Trump administration from breaking the law. Meanwhile, as the Trump administration moves away from responsible climate action and doubles down on fossil fuels, I think every state can do more and can, unpreempted by the federal government. And so that's where the policymakers come in to sort of fill those voids and those areas where leadership isn't being provided to do more. So policymaking has a role, and we will protect our progress in courts, as we already have.
All right, who's next?
I'm a little short because I'm Filipino. Well, good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Irene Reyes. I'm CEO and founder of Excel Supply Company, as well as the founder of AWMB, pronounced as AMBI, which is the Association of Women and Minority Businesses. AMBI is a nonprofit organization dedicated to advocating for women and minority-owned small businesses, helping them secure contracts, accelerate their growth, and amplify their voices. I launched my business nearly 33 years ago, and earned my state OMWBE certification as an MWBE and DBE. By the way, Oregon too. I'm certified in both states, except California. I'm working on that. Since then, I'm proudly benefited from both state and federally funded programs designed to support small businesses like mine. These programs played a vital role in the company's development and success. Over the years, I have successfully bid on secured contracts across multiple levels of government, including federal, state, municipal, and city agencies, demonstrating my company's capability to meet diverse public sector needs. I have the honor of serving on the boards of several nonprofit organizations and agency advisory panels focused on empowering small women and minority-owned businesses, as well as promoting workforce development efforts. I have a lot of questions for you from my members, but I was only allowed to ask one. So, in light of the evolving federal stance on DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, what practical guidance would you offer small businesses to ensure compliance and reduce uncertainty?
Well, let me take this one first. Every time we see an executive order from the president, we all experience this rush to act. Businesses, governments, nonprofits that are fearful for their funding or their impacts, and I certainly understand that. We saw that, in the reaction from law firms in this country, which I did not understand the reaction to. But what I first and foremost try to remind people of is not a damn thing the president has done via executive order is a law. They're memorandums, more or less. He hasn't passed a single law eliminating DEI. There hasn't been a court since he's become president to say DEI, however they define it, is illegal. And nothing hasn't changed in laws in our states. The Washington laws empowering and protecting DEI practices remain. Our law against discrimination, which is a powerful tool, remains. And so I certainly understand when businesses are fearful for the attack on DEI, which at its heart is based on racism, in my viewpoint, but it hasn't impacted anything. And so here, the protections that you had 6 months ago, they remain in place now. Now, we are obviously seeing more and more challenges to those. We are seeing threats to our agencies of loss of funding. If you have anything that mentions black, woman, gay, trans, the type of attacks they're doing based on nonsense standards is really indicative of the type of vengeful action we see from this administration. But we will, as AGs, continue to defend our laws that remain empowering and can tell the stories like you. And, it's all done on those guys that the administration is going to eliminate DEI to bring back fairness and merit-based systems. I mean, Pete Hegseth? Are you kidding me? I mean, there are so many unqualified people in this administration. I'm an Army veteran, and they removed a decorated black general with a record of service and replaced him with a TV personality with nowhere near the same qualifications. And then that person, who is not qualified for that role, comes and strips every reference to the contributions of people of color to the military. I mean, it's offensive. And it's based on nothing. It's nonsense. It's racism. But nothing has changed about our law, and we will continue to fight and defend those laws on your behalf. So I said not all of us have to answer every question, but I don't want to also stop my... Okay, who's next?
Hi, my name is Shannon. I'm a mom of 2, and I work in the arts. But I am also a volunteer for Planned Parenthood, and I see what an impact that reproductive health has for people of all ages and all backgrounds. I myself was a patient of Planned Parenthood as a teenager. My current teen goes to Planned Parenthood, and as someone my husband lost his job this year, and I'm currently on Apple Health, so I've turned back to Planned Parenthood for my own reproductive health needs. And I would like to talk about the big, beautiful bill that just passed and how quickly it was passed through and is being pushed to the Senate. And this bill it looks like it would be about 200 Planned Parenthood clinics that would close and cost Americans about $300 million. So I know that your leadership can make a difference, and I'd like to know what you, as attorneys general, can do to support the reproductive choice providers and safety net clinics in the face of attacks from the federal government. And this is an issue that faces people of all ages and backgrounds.
Thank you.
I think that this is an incredibly important issue right now, and you see what's going on at the federal government through Congress, which is mind-blowing. I already said words earlier that I knew my comms person was like, oh my goodness, he's unleashed. And so I'll refrain from repeating it. I think the other thing that's wild about this moment in time are the things that are going on in conservative states right now that we're not regularly hearing about in blue states, and that the national media is not elevating. There are women in physical health crises in different states that are being turned away. There are people being arrested. There are things that are absolutely mind-blowing if you go back 10 years ago. And when you hear people talk about this, and I'll talk like my mom will talk about this, she had more rights growing up with her own body than she does today. And it is a wild place in time that we're at. And so you have, again, I'd like to get back to the roles that we have, right, in this space as attorneys general. We have a certain set of tools in the litigation side where we can come in and protect under certain areas. I think we also play an incredibly important role right now in this time to work with legislative bodies to fix some of the things that we got going on. There's small things you don't even think about. Do you know that the mergers of healthcare has a significant impact on reproductive health? And so we have to have laws in place where we're focusing on access. When we live in blue states like that on the border, and I know this is exactly for Washington, where we have Idaho that is to our east, the access of care coming from Idaho in those communities, the funding models for these what I would say more rural communities has to shift dramatically. But some of those tools need to come from our state legislature. The federal government isn't, I think we can't rely upon them anymore. I think we have to create our own infrastructure. If you think about what they are also doing into training the next generation of physicians across this entire country, that is being threatened. So then the question comes from blue states like ours, what is our responsibility as a blue state to then fulfill frankly, the workforce that we need as a nation to move forward to make sure that reproductive health care is something that is a reality in the future. There's a handful of issues. These conversations are starting right now nationally, right? But again, it is this partnership where the federal government is really taking, and as we swing back and forth between different presidencies, different congressional things, we have different obligations of states, and I think we have an increased role to move in. So when we talk about the funding, think about the Medicaid reimbursement, all these other different reimbursements, there is a funding model within different Planned Parenthood models. And so we have to think about as a state, do we shift that? What are those responsibilities, right? So I think these conversations are just beginning, but it's incredibly bothersome to me, just on a personal level, the dire nature of the conversations that are not being elevated to the front of across this country. It's incredibly bothersome.
Yeah, I'll just add, as the federal government recedes from its role in supporting reproductive freedom, such as that has been, it's incumbent upon states to step up and do more. And so many states have done that in the wake of the Dobbs decision that reversed Roe versus Wade, and California was one of them. We passed a statewide proposition enshrining in our state constitution the right to contraception and reproductive health care. We passed a whole series of laws working with Planned Parenthood and others that make California a sanctuary reproductive freedom state where patients can receive and providers can provide safe and legal abortion. In California, we've protected reproductive health care data and refused to work with other states seeking to impose civil or criminal liability on patients who receive or providers who provide safe legal abortion in California. So there's a whole set of laws and protections that we've put in place. Increased funding to replace the funding being withheld or revoked at the federal level is another answer. And for many of the federal laws that have been in place that should be providing support for reproductive health care, states can provide similar protections if those federal laws are not being enforced or if they're being weakened, like the FACE Act, the freedom of access to clinics at the federal level. There's a law there. California is actually stronger, our version of it. EMTALA, the access to emergency health care, abortion is health care, including for emergency care. California has an Emergency Services Act that is actually provides some of the same protections as well. So states can step up into this void, with whether it be budget or constitutional protections or statutory protections to help make sure that our commitment to reproductive freedom is manifest and as strong as it should be.
The one thing I'll add is that, for at least for me, the biggest surprise that I've had in this role in terms of seeing what we're seeing from the Trump administration is that they haven't yet done what we were anticipating, what Project 2025 says fairly explicitly, tried to target access to abortion via executive order or some other change in agency policy. But that is coming. It is undoubtable that there will be some action probably this year attacking access and the right to reproductive freedom in this country, on top of the harm that we're going to see from the bill, the budget bill. I'll just say on that, we will be ready. We will be absolutely ready. That is one of the issues that we are prepared for across all of our states.
I thought I would share something about A.G. Brown that a lot of you don't know, because no one's going to say this. Behind the scenes, when we meet on different issues, right, and we're talking as Democratic attorneys general, certain attorneys general will stand up and lead on issues, and they will go. From day one, Attorney General Brown has done that, and one of the issues actually is very related here, was on gender-affirming care. He's a good politician, so he's not going to brag, okay? He'll have someone else brag for him, and that's why I'm here. And I say this with the most sincerity. There was one attorney general that stood up early and right on, and you got to think about it. Both he and I came new into these roles, right? And he stood up at the very beginning amongst a lot of veteran attorneys general and said, "This is our issue. We've got this thing covered, and we're leading on it." And to his credit, I mean, his office and himself are leading on this and many other things. And so I just wanted to make sure that a lot of people probably don't know that, but it's actually a very big deal, so.
I think we have one. Thank you. You guys are all so dark in this bright light, so I'm like, where are people? Go ahead, thank you.
Hello, my name is Sylvia Liang. I'm an immigrant, a citizen, a caregiver, and a parent provider for my son, Brian. Because of Medicaid, Brian is able to be the person he is today. He's happy, he's healthy, working, and very much a part of our community. If you meet him, I know you'll like him. Recently, Brian and I had an assessment with his case manager from DDA, and we were told that for this coming year, there will be enough funding, but after that, it's unclear if there will be. No one knows. Our Medicaid funding is on thin ice, and it is clear that the worst is yet to come. I know that many immigrants who are undocumented or their children also rely on Medicaid for their health care. Immigrants are the backbone of our economy, and Washington State made the right choice to recognize their valuable contributions by allowing Medicaid to cover their health care regardless of immigration status. This one big, beautiful bill directly attacks that and makes our potential state budget challenges, like my DDA case manager mentioned, and even worse, by imposing $600 million yearly fine on states that use Medicaid funds to cover undocumented immigrants. So my question is, what are we going to do to protect both our Medicaid funding and undocumented immigrants? And how are we going to fight back against these direct attacks on our immigrant communities that withhold federal funds that my son relies on for his care? Thank you.
I think we're all better off when we all have access to affordable, high-quality health care. Everyone, regardless of immigration status, period, full stop. I was the Assembly Health Chair when I was in the California State Legislature. This is an issue I care deeply about. And in California, we do provide health care paid for by the state for undocumented immigrants in California who are on Medi-Cal, our version of Medicaid. We have universal health care right now in California and across this country, meaning anyone can receive health care when they show up in the emergency room, regardless of immigration status. And that is not the best place to receive health care. We're better off when people have access to regular appointments and vaccines and wellness and prevention treatment. And a healthy community, including everyone, regardless of immigration status, makes us all more healthy and is positive for public health. So California has a policy now similar to what Washington has with respect to providing health care for our undocumented community members. That infuriates the Trump administration. This is the Trump administration waging the culture wars. They're waging them all the time, whether it be at DEI or sanctuary cities and states or undocumented immigrants receiving health care, even if the state fully funds the health care for undocumented immigrants in their state. So we believe, California believes, that if there is a policy that's passed that says that California will receive less Medicaid funding from the federal government if they use their own funding, 100% of their own funding to provide health care for undocumented immigrants, that's unlawful. That is a coercive use of the federal government's spending authority, and we would sue on that to protect our right to provide health care to undocumented Californians that are our community members. What's happening in the Big Beautiful Bill, though separately, is what A.G. Rayfield was saying earlier, which is it is a way that Congress can make budgetary decisions. It can appropriate more or appropriate less for certain programs, and the Medi-Cal, the Medicaid cuts that are included therein are absolutely devastating to healthcare across the country. It's making America sick again, and not supporting healthcare for Americans. So if some of those cuts pass, it'll be devastating for Americans. It would also, I believe, make it fait accompli that the House will flip blue in the next cycle, but not without, unfortunately, sadly, and tragically, a lot of pain suffered by Americans along the way.
I have a question.
There's one more.
Oh, they said that was the last one. Okay.
Sorry, there's one more.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Good evening. My name is Fred Thomas. I am aligned with Next Steps Washington, Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, and I co-chair the advisory board for the Office of Independent Investigations. And that's because in 2013, the Fife Police Department turned our neighborhood into a war zone by calling out a SWAT team and a total of 29 officers for one unarmed, drunk citizen. Now, before they used his mother to lure our son Leonard outside, only to shoot him right in front of her, they jailed me for stepping on my property and saying I could get my son to come out alive. To which one officer replied, "That is never gonna happen." And another, with a gun in my back, said, "We're going to take care of that piece of shit son of yours." That is where my story ends, because the rest of that night I spent in a cell knowing my son would soon be dead. And after ripping a screaming Elijah, my grandson, from his dad's arms, an officer said Leonard's last dying words were, "Please don't hurt my son." Now, there are 4 points I would like you to take home with you. 1, since 2019, when I-940 became operative, a total of 31 officers have been killed by gunfire in your 3 states. 6 in yours, 2 in yours, and 23 in yours. Washington officers have killed more than that last year alone and are on pace to kill double that number this year. Third, our police have killed more citizens in 2016 and 17 than Washington lost in Afghanistan's enduring freedom from 2001 to 2014. 4, 3 officers were found punitively liable for the unnecessary murder of our son to the tune of $6 million. Yet later that year, the city of Lakewood gave all of them promotions and no discipline was ever levied against them. So my question to you is, individually and collectively, are you going to keep up the status quo? Or what can you do to make the citizens of your state safer?
Well, first and foremost, let me just say thank you for your question and for the honesty and directness and the willingness to continue to tell your son's story. You know, with all of the chaos that we're seeing in this country and the other issues and the explicit backtracking from some of the commitments that states, companies, individuals made from advancing justice reform that we've seen in the last handful of years, it is easy to lose sight of the fact that we still have in this country on a regular basis in all of our states the tragedies that you're talking about. And it's important for me as the Attorney General, for our respective state legislative bodies, local officials, to not lose sight of the fact that we still have young people, principally people of color, that are dying at the hands of law enforcement. And we as leaders need to speak that truth first and foremost, and make sure that we're reminded of that so we don't keep our eye off of that. We need to continue to advance issues that will improve community safety. The Office of Independent Investigation, in my view, is a good step in that direction, but it is not all that we need to do. There has been efforts in our state to create an Office of Independent Prosecution that would allow for the Attorney General or some other entity to be an independent voice in reviewing these uses of force. That is important work. We seem to have backtracked from this idea that there are alternatives to law enforcement that we should not lose sight of. And I will tell you that time and time again in my conversations with law enforcement, with many law enforcement leaders, they also don't want to spend their time dealing with people who are suffering from a mental health crisis or some other crisis. They would rather have people that are trained with that expertise, and we need to, as a state, continue to advocate for that. But when people violate the law, it shouldn't matter whether they wear a uniform or not. Just like it should not matter whether they're president of the United States or not. When they violate the law, they should be held accountable. These are tough, tough issues. I've spent most of my career as a lawyer in and around law enforcement. I'm very proud of my service with law enforcement as the U.S. Attorney, because I know the really challenging work that those people are doing to keep our communities safe. But they make mistakes. They act recklessly. They act with disregard for communities of color. And when that sort of thing happens, they should be held accountable. And it is important that we use the tools in our offices to bring those cases. And our states are all different in terms of our ability to initiate investigations around use of force, to prosecute such cases. Our law enforcement function varies tremendously in all of the states. But as you know, in the last few years, the Attorney General's office here has been empowered to do those cases at the request of the governor, or sometimes at the request of a local prosecutor's office. And I embrace those challenging cases to try to bring justice for people in their communities, and we'll continue to do that. So let me, I know there are other questions that people want to ask, and woman right here was eager to ask a question, so happy to turn to you.
Okay, the first one is a statement, not a question. Everybody repeat it after me. Big, ugly bill. Please, do not call it the big, beautiful bill. It is ugly. The people who support it are ugly. They are doing ugly things. Consider moving forward saying that. Attorney General Rayfield, you mentioned that things are happening in red states that we don't know about. I believe you. What can we do to make the media, help the media get it out? And one thing we can do is call it the big ugly bill versus the big beautiful bill. Call Pete Hegseth a DUI hire. But what can we do really to help fix things? I mean, we're losing brain drain. We're having a brain drain here. Dr. Neum mentioned that. I mean, this is terrible. But what can we as citizens do?
Thank you for the question, and I do appreciate the modification to my, my labeling of the bill.
It's not
the
just
big
you, it's all
ugly
of us.
bill, big ugly bill. I think, and I'm interested in my colleagues' opinions on this. Well, I think this is a question, and I was a part of a gathering back east talking just about this. What are the things that we need to do in each one of these lanes? And one of the big issues was kind of the storytelling of what's going on, and in the nonprofit space right now, there is an effort afoot to really start elevating some of these stories, but it is something that we are all struggling with. I think we all have collective responsibilities in our own networks to elevate, but that's a start, right? That is not where it goes. I think sometimes I feel like we're the frog in boiling water, right? Where, I mean, if we had taken this moment in time and took it back a decade, all of us would be enraged and astounded. And I think we're starting to see that right now across this country with some of the rallies and where things are. I have a personal feeling that we're I still feel like we're that frog in the boiling water at times with how things are shifting. And so I think continuing to elevate and is where we are. And then I think you have partners in these different spaces among elected officials, among advocacy organizations like Planned Parenthood. And as we begin this process of elevating some of these bigger conversations, what I can tell you is that there are larger conversations in the country going on to do just that.
But you're preaching to the choir here. But we need to tell the choir to stand up, right? So what do we do to take more action? We're calling our congresspeople, we're standing out protesting, but what are we doing?
Well, I wouldn't undervalue that work to do that, to protest, to show up, to have your voices heard. That has an impact. I think this tide will turn. We will survive Donald Trump. But the tide will turn and the country will continue to improve when people continue to have their voices heard. And the one thing that I would say on all of these issues, it is easy to solely focus on the national issues. But in each of our states, in every legislative session, there are hundreds of bills being passed. As much as our time and attention is on addressing the national moment, do not lose sight of the impact that you can have in your state and in your local government. There are things that Washington State can do, continue to improve healthcare and access and safety here. And we need to make sure that we not only show up in red states to have your voices heard, but continue to lose sight of all the action that's happening, focus on the action that's happening in our state capitals. Where?
Hi, I'm Randy Baker. I'm a lawyer, and I'm sure you're all aware that Mr. Trump, based on his conduct, doesn't really take elections all that seriously. That is, the rules governing elections. We have reason to think he'll try and cheat, and as president, he's got a lot of power to do that. I'm sure you've all thought about it. Have you planned any contingencies? Probably in the West Coast states, voting will be pretty clean on the whole. Purple states, red states, they elect members of Congress, they elect presidents. Any strategies to make sure he's unable to prevent the electorate from expressing itself fairly?
Well, the first thing that we've done is that I think all of us are in the lawsuit challenging the executive order around voting and the voting systems. And this is, again, one of those actions that the president has taken that is so obviously illegal and unconstitutional. The Constitution and statutory authority is very clear that states have control over their electoral systems. We have prevailed at the initial stages of that litigation. I cannot imagine a scenario where we don't continue to prevail in that specific case, which will then reaffirm again that states have control over their systems. But of course, what the president and his colleagues in elected office and his supporters are going to say when they lose the next election is that there was cheating, that there was fraud. We all have some ability to interface with that. We all have voting and voting rights as a cornerstone of a lot of our work. Some of that work in my office lives in our Civil Rights Division. We try to work with our Secretary of State's office and local officials to make sure that they understand the protections that Washington law provides. And that's, I think, the best thing that we can do, because he's not going to be on the ballot. He's not going to be on the ballot the next election. But again, it's going to be someone next, right? And it's, I make the mistake of looking at my own Twitter account from time to time. There are people in this state, including, people in elected office as Republicans, who think that I was elected by fraud, which is just so absurd. But it's echoed by the Republican Party of this state and other people in positions of authority. And, the best tool that we have is continue to speak the truth to that absurdity and bring the actions that we're bringing collectively across the country.
And I might just, let's clap for Nick. I might just add, when we're talking about a strategic plan, we were at a conference with some Democratic attorneys general last week. California wasn't there. But one of the conversations that we did have was actually on election integrity and being prepared for the moment. And I think that actually goes to the question when we're talking about reproductive health. What do we all do nationally to do this? In certain areas, I think we also got to keep in mind, whether it's reproductive health, whether it is in the election space, this is a pattern and a plan that has gone on for a period of time. We have to be strategic and organized if you want to turn the tide or protect some of these inherent values, and I think that's why last week, A.G. Brown and myself, not A.G. Bonta, were at a conference talking about election integrity and how we're going to be prepared for the next 2 years. Do you want to talk about the conference?
Not specifically the conference, but the important issue that's been raised. One of the key positions that we take as attorneys general in our lawsuit against the executive order by the Trump administration on elections is that we reaffirm the Constitution's mandate that Congress and the states are able to determine the time, place, and manner of elections, not the president. He can't say that ballots cast timely before Election Day by mail but received after Election Day can't be counted. He can't say that there's widespread fraud in our elections when there's not. That's not true, and that you need to have an original document showing your proof of citizenship when you vote. And so we've challenged that. That's just the first salvo in the first 19 weeks from the Trump administration. But we fully expect what you've said, that the Trump administration will try to suppress votes or put a finger on the scale when it comes to the elections and how votes are counted or not counted or who participates or who can't, how rolls are purged. And so having a Democratic Attorneys General subcommittee or work group, if you will, to be focused on that and prepared for what comes is going to be important. So we see what you see coming down the pike, and we're going to be ready.
So I want to go over here and then over there.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you three for coming today. I'm originally from Southern California, but I lived in Seattle for about 1.5 years.
Welcome home.
Did you like California better?
Weather better. Nah, I always be in California, but I love Seattle. I was disappointed when I saw that Governor Newsom was gushing over Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk. We have people like John Fetterman turning to the right, and my question is for you three: are you It's easy to stand up for people you disagree with, but it's harder to stand, against your friends. Are you guys committed to standing up to those who are on your side as well?
That's a great question. At the base of all of our responsibilities, of our oaths of office, is the defense of our respective state laws and the United States Constitution. And that is what has been the base of all of our litigation efforts on a national level. And there are policy debates that Trump and his supporters could be having. There are reasonable disagreements about the size of government, about the amount we spend on government programs, on the type of health care we should provide. Reasonable people can disagree about those. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is lawlessness, and so we have to respond to those. But I'm sure in each of our states that we've done things that aren't going to be the most politically popular stances in our states. We filed an appeal of a lawsuit on one of the state initiatives that I didn't personally support, but we're going to defend it because it is Washington state law. If our legislature passes laws that I personally disagree with, if they're lawful, we're going to defend those things, and that's what we have to continue to do. And that is the common thread that binds all of our litigation. Let me go over here, and then I'll let my colleagues answer too. Go ahead.
Hi, this pertains to the state's sanctuary laws. Both Washington and Oregon do not comply with ICE detainers. This means that illegal immigrants charged with serious crimes, including child rape and attempted murder, are released back into the community to reoffend instead of being transferred into ICE custody. Do you defend this policy? And two, if an illegal alien goes on to reoffend because of this policy, do you take any responsibility?
So first and foremost, thank you for your question. This is type of that disagreement that you were just suggesting. My job is to defend Washington state law. Washington state law has a law called the Keep Washington Working Act that puts some limitations on how local law enforcement can cooperate with federal criminal or civil immigration enforcement. Law enforcement here is not prohibited from cooperating on criminal matters, but they are not in the business, according to our state law, of cooperating on civil immigration enforcement. If the law was different, I would defend that law. In Washington state, my job is to defend that law because it is the law that was passed by your representatives. And for the reasons that we talked about earlier, this is a law that enhances public safety, in my view, that it allows for people to feel safe in cooperating with law enforcement on criminal matters, that it makes people not fearful when they go to school, that when they drop off their children, they're not going to see their children again. And I will continue to defend that law because it is the oath of office that I took, and because I think it is sound policy moving forward.
And what about you?
I think just the one thing up here, and I won't speak for my two colleagues, but I do think that most people feel the same way. If you've committed a state law crime, you're not above the law, right? And you are going to be held accountable. And I think the fact pattern that you were talking about talked about a state law crime that someone had committed in Oregon. If you commit a crime, you are going to be held accountable.
Do you guys see any problem with it, though, releasing them back instead of just transferring to ICE?
Well, I think your framing of the facts isn't actually 100% accurate, but we're happy to talk about it further.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Claire Newman. I'm an attorney representing tribes across the country. First, I want to say thank you so much for all of your hard work. It's really incredible, the commitment. So one of my favorite things that Obama used to say is that there's no red America and blue America. There's one America. And when I travel to Eastern Washington, people sometimes feel like their concerns aren't heard. I worked for a time in South Dakota, and I met the amazing Senator Aberesk at that time. I had the opportunity to work in DC and met Senator Tester. And I'm working on a case in Idaho, and I know that Idaho, has a long history of being a blue union representing state. And I know that right now saving our democracy is the most urgent task, but we also will have an election in a few years. We all know there will be. And so we need to elect a new president, and to do that, we need to kind of unify our states and our countries. And so I'm wondering, what tools you have in your toolboxes, or which can be new and created, using your soapbox, as you said, to speak to, a broader swath of just, the people who came here tonight, to speak to the eastern sides of your states, to speak to, middle America, and really begin trying to unify the country. I was so heartened by Bernie Sanders and AOC's tour, and I think it's really courageous. And so I agree with and appreciate everything that's being said tonight. But I also would love to know how you can use your tools and authority and credibility to speak to as many people as possible. Thanks.
And I can start off. I think the way that I look at this is I come from a little bit of a legislative lens and talk a little bit of how we approach things in the legislature. It's getting out into community with people. And so I would spend time with our minority leader when I was Speaker of the House, and I went to her house. We had dinner after very difficult elections. We walked or did tours around the state, meeting with people. But I don't think that is enough. Merely going to a community and talking and engaging in a conversation is not enough. I think you have to listen. You have to hear what's going on. Often, I think even the woman that was just up here really felt passionately about her question. I think the one thing that we have in common is that we both want public safety in our communities. Right? And so it's trying to find the commonality of what's really going on. In the Speaker's office, it was about putting the words and these actions and what we heard into action. And so we created a $100 million rural infrastructure package. Now, it's one thing when you do that, right? Because there's needs in those communities. I could sit with my Democratic colleagues in a closed door and choose what the infrastructure was. Or I could empower the Republicans in that caucus to then make the decisions for what they need in their communities and use their own judgment in that space and elevate people in the conversation. We did that on bigger issues, housing, Right, that was one thing, a big problem we have in Oregon is how do we really spur the growth of housing with our shortage that we have? And so we brought in, that's a bipartisan issue. So we made Republicans co-equals at the table as we tried to come with a package that met the needs of all four corners of our state in that process and really empowering in that space. Now, of course, we may disagree on policy, right? And as the majority party, you're going to control when it comes to policies like that. And so I think taking that same approach into this role, and I can't speak for California or Washington, but that's kind of the approach that we're taking, is moving out on some of these different issues, meeting people where there is commonality of issues. I think the one thing that all of us, Republicans and Democrats also, even in light of what's going on federally, is that we were all taught in grade school that you got to follow the Constitution. It doesn't matter who you are. You got to follow the law, right? There's commonality. If you talk to Republicans, do you think the president should violate the Constitution? They're all going to say no. Right? And so there's this process of having these conversations. Yeah. Good point. The Republicans in community and not in office.
So I want to be mindful of time, and I know we have a lot of questions, so if you don't mind, Rob, I'm just going to go to the next question here.
I really appreciate the work that all three of you are doing. I have a two-part question. My perception in following the media is that the Trump administration is not always following the court orders that you win with your lawsuits. The first example that comes to mind is some immigration court decisions where the courts have ordered that people should not be deported, but they have been anyway, in one case, I think 28 minutes after the order issued. My question is, number one, do you agree with my perception? And number two, if the Trump administration doesn't follow the orders that you win, what can be done?
Rob,
Great question, and thank you for that. I do want to distinguish between the universe of cases that we're involved in, the 20-plus cases that Democratic attorneys general are involved in now, and some of the other cases that you've read about in the media, where we're not parties in those cases, and there's other attorneys representing other parties. Broadly, in our cases, the ones that Democratic attorneys general are involved in, when we secure an order, the order is followed. Not every single time. We had a really wide-ranging order in one of our cases that covered a lot of funding sources from the federal government, and there was some disagreement between the federal government and us about what was contemplated and encompassed by the court order. The federal government thought certain funding sources were not included. We thought they were. We moved to enforce the order to make sure that the areas that we thought were included got covered by the order. Both sides made their argument. The judge heard the case. The argument made a decision. We won, and then the federal administration started following the clarified order. And so that doesn't mean that in other cases they're not highly problematic, and they are. When it comes to Abrego Garcia and some other cases involving immigrants that are being deported, there seems to be a belief that when it comes to foreign affairs, other sovereign countries, working with El Salvador and moving people overseas, that there's much more authority in the federal government's hands than the courts agree with. And so those are huge red flags. Especially when combined with tweets by J.D. Vance about the court shouldn't tell the military how to run the military, or Mike Johnson saying that the court should stand down. We can't be naive about this, about the federal government potentially not following clear court orders and going forward. There are steps along the way. You ask, what can we do? One, we can move to enforce the order when it's not being followed. We've done that in our cases. We've won. They've followed the orders once we've won. You can also move for civil contempt, meaning someone is put in jail, not criminally, they're not serving a sentence, but they're put in jail. And it's usually, this isn't Trump, it's usually a head of an agency or a head of a department who has the ability to comply with the order. And they sit in jail, and the way it's described is they have the keys to the jailhouse door. All they need to do is follow the order, and then they can walk out the door. It's up to them. And that hasn't happened in any of our cases yet. I know some of the judges are talking about having civil contempt proceedings. Criminal contempt is another step that needs to be taken as well. But those are all progressive steps that can be taken to make sure court orders are followed. But there's no doubt the courts are being stress tested. Orders are being not followed with alacrity and clarity and that you'd like to see. There's a lot of undermining of the court's authority, calling judges so-called judges and activist judges, and calling for impeachment when a judge doesn't come out on an issue in the substantive way that you want them to. And that's bad for our democracy. That's wrong. So we see that. But in most of our cases, the orders are broadly being followed.
Move over here.
Yes. Hi, I'm Zahra Islami, and it's nice to see you from this distance. I came from an educated family, and we came to the United States because of the higher education. We went to the University of Minnesota. And I'm a parent for 2 kids, and I'm an advocate for all students. But in a context that I want to ask, this is my question. What steps are your office taking to ensure the Muslim students and their families are protected from discrimination, surveillance, and hate, both in schools and in broader civic spaces, while fully upholding their constitutional right to religious freedom, dignity, and equal treatment under the law?
So we have so many people in each of our states who are suffering on a day-to-day basis because of discrimination, because of hate crimes, bullying, employment opportunities, housing opportunities, educational opportunities. And that was happening before Trump. It'll happen after Trump. And we need to make sure that we use all of the tools in our offices and our states to address discrimination. And we have a robust state law against discrimination that is a powerful tool for us to use as an AG's office. I think we have some of the most talented lawyers and professional staff in the country in our Civil Rights Division here in Washington who work collaboratively with our states here. And so we need to make sure that we're accessible to the community so we can tell the stories that people who are victimized, who are often marginalized communities, feel like they can reach out and tell their stories about harm or fears of harm. And so we can respond accordingly with our actions in our lawsuits, because that has been proven to be an effective tool to help people address some of that very real concern that they're facing.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. And I do echo the prior speaker's comments to you that we appreciate your work. We appreciate you choosing to be in this work at this time and everything that you're doing, seen and unseen. My name is Andrea Capane-Sanderson, and I'm with the Washington LEAD Initiative, Legal Education Advocacy and Defense, which there's one in California, there's one in Oregon, and now in Washington State. And we are happy to be joining forces with you in the governor's office to be protecting our nonprofit sector. My question to you is, what are you thinking about, how are you thinking proactively in each of your states? And my question earlier was going to be, talk with us at length, but now it's briefly about how each of your states are really thinking strategically and tactically about protecting our nonprofit sector from legal maneuvers, from threats to our tax-exempt status, and all of the executive orders that affect our organizations and the work that they do in Washington State and the other states.
She said briefly. I don't know who's going to be briefer.
Nobody was picking the microphone up, so very quickly, I think you have some really creative attorneys general across this country that are actually working on this specific issue. All of our offices have heard from nonprofits that are incredibly fearful about their lifelines from the federal government, whether it's grant funding or specific policies and the way that things are moving forward. That's a baseline. Our office has been engaging with nonprofits in Oregon. We've held forums with them, trying to be creative where we can't really be the lawyers for nonprofits, but how do you provide generalized understanding of what the state of the law is. I think you're finding people I think engaging in that way. We put together a federal oversight accountability cabinet in the state of Oregon, which has certain people from all different sectors that come together to talk about what they're seeing, so that way we can be more responsive and then elevate it. If it's not something that we can be directly responsive to, then we can elevate that into the proper channels, whether that's the executive branch with the governor or whether that's in a legislative space, to create more certainty in an incredibly uncertain world.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm president of the board here at Town Hall, and I just want to thank you for hosting this event here. And I'm hoping you can answer this question. What is the role of the U.S. Marshals in enforcing court orders?
I mean, plainly speaking, that in the U.S. Marshals Service has a lot of authority to protect judges, court officials, and when directed, enforce some of the actions that can be given by a court. Not all. And in part, it's important to understand that the Marshal Service does not work directly for our courts, it works for the executive branch, which is sort of back of mind for me as we address some of these potential crisis issues. Having been the U.S. Attorney for Western Washington and seen the incredible work that the Marshal Service does, and also dealing with people who are violating court orders or running from enforcement on criminal actions, they do some incredibly important and brave work. I'm hoping we don't get to that point where we need to call upon the Marshal Service to take action against federal officials, but we are creeping closer and closer to that. I know we have more questions. I also know my colleagues here have to take flights back home. I, on the other hand, have a 20-minute commute, but I do have 2 young kids I also need to get home. So I want to take one more question and then allow opportunities for us to say some final remarks. And if you have a question that hasn't been answered, my staff and I will still be the Attorney General's Office for Washington tomorrow, and please do be in contact.
Thank you. I can talk pretty fast. I grew up in California. My family is still there. I live in Washington now. I'm a middle child, so you guys got that for you. I have a single mom. My brother has a rare genetic neuromuscular disorder that requires extensive medical care. He's cheated death several times over. He's on Medi-Cal. My whole family's on Medi-Cal, and my mom uses Medi-Cal funds to be a caregiver, and that's what her employment is. She's a caregiver for my siblings. I have another sibling who has Down syndrome, autism, and ADHD, also healthcare, Medi-Cal, lots of Medi-Cal in my family, never a dull moment. My brother will die if Medi-Cal is taken away. My sister would not have health care. She's in special ed, and I'm racked with anxiety day and night, and you said maybe if the state comes up with its own funds to cover the shortfall federally, then things could be okay, but I don't really see how that's possible. And so what's your plan? I'd love to hear it.
One of the things that we're doing now is observing all of the areas where the federal government is failing to fulfill its traditional roles. One is consumer protection, antitrust is another. We're trying to step up into those spaces. Healthcare, obviously, is another. And you're right, the states don't have unlimited funding. The slugs of funding that we get from the federal government are huge. We rely on them. When we don't get them, they blow big holes in critical, essential services. So, I mean, part of it is pushing back on the big ugly bill and making sure that the damage isn't inflicted in the first place, holding Congress members accountable, engaging in their districts and having people who are on Medi-Cal in their districts when they're about to vote on Medicaid so that they know who's listening and what their constituents are saying. That's critical. But I wish I could guarantee you that every time the federal government takes away $1, the states can replace it. We should try, and we should try to replace it in the most impactful way to save lives and lift up health, but we can't. And so that's part of the life and death and critical high-stakes scenario that we're in. And this is when everyday people like all of you need to tell your stories. That's a powerful story about your family members and the healthcare that they rely on and the special ed services that they need. You know, meanwhile, we have Elon Musk and Trump saying that those services are waste, that they're fraud, that they're abuse, when they are life-saving. And so pushing back on the narrative before decisions are made and making sure the elected officials, Trump doesn't make all the decisions. Congress is making the decision on the big, ugly bill. So engagement and participation in the democracy to make sure that the damage is limited, and then states can step in as much as possible after that. Also, the nonprofit world can, the foundation world can. There's an army of folks who can step up into some of these gaps to limit the damage and support Americans.
Yeah, and I would just quickly say, I've always been a supporter of universal health care. I think it's one of the most personal things one of the personal benefits that impacts us and families in ways that, like, it's just, you can't even comprehend. And so what I do know is that among our Democratic attorneys general, we're going to do everything we can to fight to stop the big ugly bill and what's going on in that Medicaid reduction. I think AG Bonta has talked a little bit about some of the legal avenues that we may be able to do that. I think, again, it's standing on the soapbox, continuing to move forward and make sure that people understand the gravity of what's going on right now. And then, frankly, moving forward, it's about getting into this next election into Congress and making sure that we have at least a majority of one of those bodies to prevent this stuff from happening during the rest of President Trump's tenure.
So I want to give all of us, starting with my colleagues, an opportunity just to share some final thoughts. But I just want to start by saying thank you, not only to you, but to my staff who helped put on this event, and to the town hall. Thank you for continuing to support forums like this. But I'll start with AG Rayfield.
Okay, I'll take applause. I'm a politician. Let's get it up. There we are. Make me feel welcome. Sorry, we're flying back tonight, right? Are we coming back? I don't know. But genuinely, thank you, A.G. Brown, for having us up here. It is wonderful to be up here in Washington with all of you. I truly appreciate the interaction with everyone tonight. I think that's the one thing that I want to just encourage everybody, is to continue to communicate with our offices. Our job are to defend the values in our states, and the only way we do that is through communication. We're doing our absolute best to monitor what's going on in Washington, but it's impactful for us to hear what's going on in the ground as well. So as you see things, as you hear things, emailing with our staff, I know each of us have counterparts and ways in so that we can be more responsive as an Attorney General office. So I just have immense gratitude for being here, taking time out of your busy evenings to be with us this evening. So thank you. And I do actually, we're coming back, right? Yeah. So that was kind of a tepid applause for us coming back, wasn't it? Like, I thought it would be louder. I just thought it would be louder. So thank you. I'll pass it off to the amazing AG.
Thank you. I'm just so grateful to have shared this time together. I'm inspired. I'm motivated. This is democracy in action. When the people come together to share their thoughts, their concerns, their worries, to flag problems, to co-create solutions, to recognize the fact that we have a shared society and we occupy a common future and we have to move forward together. And as elected officials, you are our bosses. We need to be and will be responsive to you. So I thank you for this moment that we've been able to share together tonight. And more of this will help us progress and overcome some of the challenges that we're facing. And you guys are here and you've taken time away from your families, from your communities, from your jobs to be here. So you don't need me to tell you this, but it is so important that we stay engaged, stay activated, keep participating in our democracy, stay not just engaged, but stay enraged about the abuses of power, stay outraged about the violations of the Constitution and repetitive, repeat offender violations of the law by Mr. Trump, and that we continue to speak up and speak out, show up, come to events like this with crowds where people power are speaking up. And I know that there's a lot to worry about, a lot to be anxious about, to be fearful of. We've heard a lot about it tonight. A lot of you are carrying a lot of worry and burden because of this moment. But I do want to say we shouldn't feel hopeless because we're not helpless. We have power. We have agency. We have the ability to make tomorrow more fair and more just than today, to change the status quo and shape it in the form that we believe is appropriate for our country, the people's country. And so there's a lot of more chapters to be left in the story of the best coast, the West Coast, in the story of America. And it is you and me who are going to write them together. And please know we'll fight by your side today, tomorrow, and always. Thank you.
First and foremost, let me just thank my wonderful colleagues. I feel so fortunate to be in this position and to have members of Attorney General's offices across this country doing this work. So thank you to you both. And as I said in the beginning, I really cannot imagine being in any other position in this moment. You know, the fears and the concerns and the challenges that you all are facing are real and they're tangible, but there are positive impacts that we can have through the action that we're doing together, collectively and often independently. But I also know that we are only as powerful as our ability to tell your stories. And that is the reason that we wanted to have this forum tonight, is the reason that we will continue to try to be as transparent and engaged as possible. Because the foundation of all the actions that we're taking on an affirmative basis are telling the stories of the people in our communities. And we will win. And we will survive this moment. And we will survive these next few years. And I am optimistic and hopeful that we will be in a better place because we will continue to come together in forums like this to try to think of a better vision than the future, than the one that this president and his team are facing. And I know that we can do that if we continue to have these conversations. So thank you again for everyone for coming and all the staff that put this together.